The real story of Custer's final battle came to light through the direct account of Red Bear. An experienced scout, Red Bear vividly recalls the brutal scenes of the Battle of the Little Bighorn in a compelling eyewitness narrative. Speaking with unfiltered truth, he paints a picture of exploding gunfire, arrows cutting through the sky, and piercing battle cries that defined this legendary clash between two worlds. Having served alongside Custer's 7th Cavalry, Red Bear offers a rare perspective on the cultural conflict that shaped the American frontier. His striking narration draws us deep into the heart of the struggle at a moment when the fate of a nation hung in the balance. So settle in and follow along as we explore this unforgettable tale. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to help grow our community. Custer had given the command to attack, directing the scouts to chase the Dakota horses away from their encampment. When Red Bear arrived at a lone teepee, the rest of the scouts had already surrounded it, snapping their whips against its sides. The scouts had charged down a dry ravine and lingered at the lodge for nearly 30 minutes before Red Bear finally joined them. "There are plenty of provisions here," one scout remarked. One feather entered the teepee, tasting the meat and sampling the soup prepared for a fallen Dakota warrior. At that moment, Custer and Fred Gerard burst onto the scene, shouting, "You were supposed to ride straight into the Sioux village!" Having ridden ahead of his men, Custer sharply rebuked the scouts, using both harsh words and physical force, as they stood by the teepee. "I ordered you forward, not to waste time," he barked. "You've ignored my command. Fall back and let the soldiers move ahead." He then issued a chilling warning. "If any of you show fear, I'll take your weapons and mark you as a woman." One scout shot back. "Tell him if he treats his own white soldiers that way when they hesitate, he'll have his hands full, just like with us." The scouts laughed, making it clear they were eager for the fight. They moved on, but Red Bear noticed Custer and his men veer to the right, passing about 50 yards beyond the isolated teepee. Riding with Gerard, the scouts included Goose, Young Hawk, Little Sioux, Bob-tailed Bull, Forked Horn, Red Foolish Bear, Boy Chief, Little Brave, Bloody Knife, Strikes Two, Black Fox, Red Star, and One Feather. They sped toward the Little Bighorn, closing in on the Dakota camp as they crossed the river. Once across, they divided again. With Dakota horses feeding near the trees, 6 scouts veered sharply to the right. Boy Chief and Red Star, followed by Strikes Two, Black Fox, Little Sioux, and One Feather. At the same time, Bloody Knife's group advanced toward the outer edge of the camp. Bloody Knife soon reappeared at a distance, driving 3 horses ahead of him. "Someone take these horses back up the hill," he shouted. "I'm keeping one for myself." Heavy dust made it difficult for Red Bear to see clearly, but he soon recognized Bloody Knife. This group included Little Brave, Red Bear, Bob-tailed Bull, Goose, Forked Horn, Young Hawk, Bloody Knife, and 2 Crow Scouts. They regrouped near the outskirts of the Sioux village and began firing their carbines. Leaping from their mounts, they took position as Dakota warriors, concealed along the bluffs, returned fire. No one remained mounted. Shots were exchanged across a distance of less than a quarter mile. Near the trees, Forked Horn called out, "Come this way!" As they advanced toward the ford leading into the Dakota camp, soldiers finally came up behind them. Red Bear noticed troops forming a defensive line across the river on his right, while edging left. Disorder was everywhere. Not a single officer or soldier paid him any attention. Still on horseback, the soldiers waited beside the scouts when Bloody Knife shouted about the horses. Red Bear urged his mount toward Forked Horn, who was issuing commands. As he dismounted, Red Bear saw a Dakota horse, wounded in the neck or face, running toward Young Hawk. "I've hit one of their horses," Young Hawk shouted, striking the animal again. White soldiers yelled wildly. A moment later, Young Hawk rode up to Red Bear. "Uncle, I shot that bay horse. It belongs to me now. Take it. Do you have a rope? You can keep it." Red Bear shook his head. "What good is it? We're fighting to stay alive. It won't help me now." Young Hawk turned his horse and rode away. Suddenly, Little Brave burst from the trees, warning that the Dakotas were preparing to charge. "They have far more men," he said urgently. "Let me fire one round into their camp before we pull back to the hill." Red Bear held Little Brave's horse steady as he dismounted. Little Brave urged Red Bear to mount and fall back toward the timber before crossing the river. No sooner had Red Bear mounted again than gunfire erupted from an ambush beyond the Little Bighorn. Dakota warriors, hidden in the brush, fired from the ground. The scouts fell back to their earlier position. From there, they saw a vast number of Dakota horsemen charging toward the ford, yelling and firing as they came. They seemed to be everywhere at once. With bullets flying, Red Bear dismounted and pulled his horse forward, until a low branch caught the saddle horn, snapping the girth and spilling his spare ammunition. He hauled on the reins until the horse surged ahead. Twice he tried to mount, only to be thrown when his canteen snagged beneath him. At last, he mounted and galloped after Little Brave, who had ridden on without stopping. Breaking through the trees, Red Bear lost sight of him in the thick dust and smoke, seeing only a dim rider ahead. He noticed 10 soldiers running into the woods, their horses tumbling into a deep ravine. Hearing their cries, Red Bear turned sharply left to avoid the gully and rode on, until the distant rider veered hard left. Knowing it wasn't Little Brave, Red Bear continued straight. His horse stumbled and collapsed, throwing him violently to the ground. As the animal fled toward the river, Red Bear sprang up and chased after it. The horse finally stopped when a dry limb caught in its bridle. As Red Bear struggled to control it with one hand, his rifle in the other, a painted Dakota warrior charged toward him from downstream. The warrior's face was painted yellow above and deep red below. Red Bear fired, knocking the Dakota from his horse. The unmanned mount reared and bolted away. 2 sounds now dominated the battlefield: the sharp whistles of the Dakotas and the steady crack of carbines. Red Bear saw his horse plunging into the river and followed, swimming until he grasped its mane. As he climbed out, he noticed the Dakota horse he had shot swimming behind him, its dark bay coat gleaming, a necklace of rattling deer hooves hanging from its neck, and a white blaze on its forehead. Nearby, Little Brave had already crossed, blood soaking his side from a wound beneath his right shoulder. Though his horse was unharmed, it wandered toward the ridge instead of returning. Suddenly, Bobtailed Bull's horse burst from the brush. Mane flying, reins snapping wildly, blood smeared across the saddle. 5 or 6 soldiers followed behind, having just crossed the river. Dakota gunfire poured down from the slopes above. Believing Little Brave and the others had been wiped out, Red Bear rode toward the ridge, only to encounter soldiers fleeing in panic. At their head rode Reno, eyes wide with fear, a white handkerchief tied around his head, foam clinging to his beard. When Reno's men raised their carbines, mistaking Red Bear for a Dakota, he shouted, "Scout! Scout!" and struck Reno's chest with his open hand. "The Sioux! The Sioux!" Reno screamed. A sergeant named John threw Red Bear extra cartridges as the soldiers fired wildly uphill. A stray bullet tore through Red Bear's coat near his armpit. Although Reno briefly steadied his men, the Dakotas eventually withdrew. 7 scouts were missing, but survivors, including Goose, Red Foolish Bear, Bob-tailed Bull, Forked Horn, Bloody Knife, Young Hawk, and Little Brave rejoined the soldiers. More scouts arrived with reinforcements, followed later by others driving 40 captured horses. By evening, Red Bear's group had traveled 6 miles beyond the lone teepee. After a tense night of pursuit and escape, they reached the Rosebud Valley, then the Rosebud River by dawn. From a high ridge overlooking the Dakota Sundance grounds, the scouts rested, studied the land, and finally rode on again, reaching by sunrise the camp where Bloody Knife had once drunk himself senseless. This eyewitness testimony reveals the turmoil and bravery of the 1876 Great Sioux War and the Battle of the Little Bighorn. For more powerful retellings of history's pivotal struggles, stay with us, like and subscribe to the channel. We'll explore even further in upcoming videos.